Hey Nick, I'm excited to have you on Dad's Interrupted. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk with you about everything.
First things first, love the book, Prioritize Us. Love the title. Your book tackles a challenge that so many couples face, which is feeling like they're growing apart even though they still love each other. What was the moment that made you realize this book needed to exist?
I realized this book needed to exist during one of the worst times in my life. I was at a very low because my now wife was going through some serious mental health struggles. She was having extreme paranoia and she was eventually having hallucinations. And ultimately, she was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenia, but it was years of figuring it out. And so a lot of unknown chaos going on. And through this deeply challenging time in my life, even though we didn't know what was happening and the situation was so severe, our relationship actually improved during the crisis. And I noticed that all our previous miscommunication struggles and small arguments, they disappeared because suddenly health and safety became our top priorities. And so for the first time, we were perfectly aligned. And so this gave me this aha moment of now that we have the same priorities and things have become easier, what happens if we apply this idea to the rest of our relationship? And so I began looking at identifying and ranking 10 core life priorities that cover most aspects of your day to day life. And I want to differentiate between values and priorities because values are beliefs that are more stable. They are pillars of your life. They might change gradually over time, but for the most part, once you're an adult, your values hold pretty true. And priorities shift regularly. They change even day to day. They certainly change over time. And so it's asking yourself, what's important to me now? Your priority. And
Yeah,
so I realize that most couples argue about surface level issues when the real conflict isn't about the things they're arguing about. It's actually about misaligned priorities or invisible priorities, things that couples haven't discussed at all, sometimes even when they're very long into their relationship.
yeah, that makes so much sense. And everyone goes through seasons of their life. So I know you recommend in the book taking, and we'll get into the test that you developed, but taking that every 6 to 12 months because, as you said, priorities change and it's important to stay on top of it. You see a lot of people, if you're on social media, talk about a relationship summit or something of that nature, whatever they like to call it, but basically meeting about your relationship on a regular basis. It's really interesting to me to see and witness men and women who focus more on their business or even their parenting, which is certainly a great focus to have, but they put their relationship on the back burner. And so, of course, you're going to have misalignment. You're going to have misaligned priorities. If you're not having conversations, how nobody's a mind reader, or at least not many people anyway, if you believe in that. So, yeah, I love your approach. You talk in the book about priority drift, where couples slowly misalign over time without even realizing it. What are the biggest contributors to this drift?
So, priority drift occurs when people don't check in with each other. So sometimes in the beginning of a relationship or at a certain point in the relationship, people have a conversation, they get aligned on some big things. Maybe in the beginning of the relationship, they're both focused on their career. And then as time goes on, their priorities shift. Maybe one starts to be more focused on relationships and family and things of that nature. If they don't check in with each other, one partner is still going to be very focused on career and won't be making any adjustments at all for this new priority that the other partner has. And so they'll just drift over time naturally if they don't check in. So regular check ins are just absolutely critical. I think of the total difference score, which is what you get as a result of the Prioritize Us test, the TDS. I think of it like a relationship credit score. Most people don't know how to measure the strength of their relationship beyond very vague emotions. And so the TDS tells you instantly how aligned you are, what's working, what needs improvement. The lower the score, the better your long term outlook. And it's like people would not make a major financial decision without knowing their credit score. but they'll make lifelong relationship decisions without anything objective or data driven to work from.
And us men, we do like the data. So I think it's really helpful to have something like this to score yourself on. And it gives you some really great insights into kind of what's going on. So I love it. A lot of dads tuning in struggle with balancing work and parenting and the relationship. What do you have to say to those dads that are struggling? Because you prioritize lots of different things. How do you recommend people in that scenario where they have a lot of balls in the air? How do they
So
choose what to prioritize?
that's a great question because the word priorities is actually a new word. It's only about 100 years old. Before that, there just used to be priority. Values are ancient. People have been discussing those, philosophizing for thousands of years. But multiple priorities is a very modern problem. So what you're addressing is really something that humans haven't figured out yet. But in the book, I have some worksheets that after you rank your priorities, I encourage you to rank how much time you're spending on each priority. So, how many hours a week am I spending on each of these 10 priorities? And this is just a really good check in for you to do with yourself. What I find is that people are always miscalibrated for the most part. Very few individuals have their actions in alignment with their intentions, which is always my goal for myself and for my relationship and for anybody that I work with, is for your actions to be in alignment with your intentions. And a big part of doing that is checking in with yourself. How am I spending my time? Am I allocating my resources properly to the priorities that are most important to me? And you'll find that people will rank entertainment, for example, in their bottom three, sometimes even last, but then they'll be spending many hours a day passively consuming content that they're not learning from and not even really getting much from, barely entertainment even, but it's become a habit. And if they don't check in with themselves, they don't assess that. And so what I encourage people to do is check in with their partner around these things too. So after they make their own assessment and they can really see where they're balanced when they look at their partner's lists and they see what's important, if they're very different, then I encourage people to start with their strong areas. So what are the pillars of the relationship? So in your question specifically, when people are juggling how to fit in kids, there's usually a co-parenting situation. Maybe they're currently married, maybe they're not, maybe they're together, maybe they're not. And so in that situation, looking at relationships is usually going to be one of a very high priority for both people, their relationships with their kids. And so that can become a pillar to bond over and work from, and then address differences later after you address the things that you're most similar on.
That's great advice. Tony Robbins has a famous quote, I'm sure you've heard it, where focus goes, energy flows. And, I think a lot of people that I run across with relationship issues, they're just now, like when they bring them up, they're focused on it. But over the past X amount of time, they haven't been focused on it. So, of course, the energy is not flowing to the relationship. Like I said earlier, you put it on the back burner, you almost take it for granted, especially people in longer term relationships. They just assume it's going to be there. And that's a really bad strategy to have if you want something to work out long term. You have to continue to put energy into the things you care about the most. And most of us do, if we're in relationships, we care about our relationships, but we often neglect them, not intentionally. It's not a conscious thought like I'm going to wake up and neglect my relationship. But it is something that I think we're all guilty of or have been guilty of in the past of saying, oh, we're good. Oh, we're good. No, we're good. And then all of a sudden you're not good. If a dad's listening right now and they're wondering if this applies to him, what are some red flags that he and his partner might be drifting apart?
So the first thing I would encourage people to do is just jot down their top three priorities right away. What's important to me right now, just as a personal exercise, takes a couple of minutes. Right? What are your top three priorities? And you're trying to figure out what the red flags are. So you want to look at where are small arguments occurring? What are the surface level issues that seem to be going on? And then if there's a lot of repeat conversations going on, repeat arguments, similar patterns, those are red flags for not addressing something at the right level. So if something's about the dishes or the finances or something like that, and you're having these arguments about surface level things, you want to look one level higher and say, let's look at our priorities. Why is this important to you? Why is getting the dishes done or being done in this time frame important to you? Or at a higher level, when you look at priorities, what is that about? Is that about communication between the two of us? Is that about you feeling safe when the environment is clean? What's at the core of this issue? And so when you're having small arguments, that's a red flag that you need to look at something at a higher level. And starting by looking at your top three priorities, asking your partner to do the same, and just comparing, do them separately and then compare, takes less than 5 minutes, and people will be shocked at one of the things that's most important to their partner at any given day.
I love that question. Why is this important to you? And I know in the book you mentioned approaching things with curiosity, especially for people that have a higher TDS, a total difference score. Approaching it with curiosity because it's, oh, I didn't know that about you. Tell me more. Tell me why. And that's a great question to ask your partner so that you can actually understand them. It doesn't mean you have to agree. It just means you want to know so that you can actually address the issue or maybe become more into alignment or at least have the awareness there. And a lot of what I like about your book is that it brings awareness. Awareness is the first step to change. And if you don't in your book has practical exercises in there. It's really fantastic. So having some sort of structure around how do I become more aware? One of the ways to become more aware is to read a book like yours and to take certain tests and do some of those exercises. And it's now I understand myself a little bit more. Now I understand my partner a little bit more. And now we can actually have real conversations and deeper conversations. And I know men struggle with these emotions and emotional conversations often, and it's part of how we're conditioned as men growing up. And I know a lot of the listeners have heard me say this before on previous episodes. We're human first. We all have emotions. It does not make you less of a man to be willing to talk about those emotions. You don't have to go blast it out on social media, but to have friends or a counselor or a coach or even your wife to be able to talk through some of these things that you're holding in for sure. You're having the feelings. It's just you don't feel comfortable talking about them. And so to get more comfortable talking about it is really helpful. So at least you can have some self-reflection on your own if you're not comfortable talking them out loud. The book really helps with that. The TDS, total difference score, is a really interesting concept. I know we talked about it a little bit more, but can you dive a little bit deeper and tell couples how does it help couples realign?
Sure, absolutely. So the total difference score is the result of taking the Prioritize Us test. And basically, the test is 10 core life priorities that you rank 1 through 10. So whether that be career, communication, spirituality, sex, 10 core life priorities, you rank them 1 through 10, one being the highest priority, 10 being the lowest. And you compare those with your partner and you get the difference between the two. So if I rank something a 1 and you rank something a 4, the difference is 3. So we do that for each priority. We add them up, and that gives us a total difference score between 0 and 50. 0 means you're perfectly aligned, no differences at all, 100% alignment. That's like 0, that's 1 in a trillion. Doesn't really happen. Don't need to worry about it. A high number, the higher the number, the more likely you are to need conversations about things sooner to avoid conflict or help the conflict that's currently occurring. So it's a data driven tool that measures priority alignment and misalignment between partners. And so I use this in my coaching practice and found that people were discovering hidden misalignments all over the place. And just by communicating better, they'll understand their differences and they'll communicate better by understanding these differences just automatically. And so if you lead with curiosity and empathy and adopt a learning stance, asking, why is this a priority for you? And find out these things first, then you'll be able to have an actionable system to work from that's objective and data driven. And it takes the emotion out of the equation. You just take 5 minutes, check in on your priorities, check in on your partners, compare the two, and see where you're at. If your number is high and you have a lot of misalignment, that just means there's a lot of low hanging fruit for improvement, for quick communication. Maybe there's certain topics like sex or spirituality that you've never even really discussed with your partner, which sometimes people are together for years and hardly touch on these topics. And when they do, sometimes it's in the beginning of the relationship. And then they're just like, oh, I'm good. Just like you said earlier, people think of commitment as a one time decision rather than a series of ongoing choices that you make every day. And to me, commitment is a decision to continuously realign, to work together, to continuously improve, for it to be mutually beneficial and long term sustainable. And that's what I'm really going for in all my relationships, especially the one with my wife.
That makes so much sense to me, and I'm sure to a lot of the listeners here. In the book, you give some great case studies, but can you talk about one of them? Tell us what kind of results have you seen?
Sure. A couple that I've recently been working with is they've been together for around 5 years. They're a blended family. They have two older children in their 30s living at home. And one works from home and one works away from home. And so they have a very interesting situation. When they took the test, one of the things that they discovered was that one partner ranked sex number 3 and the other partner ranked sex number 10. And so this is a big difference at something that it can be very central to your relationship. And what we eventually uncovered was that sex was a low priority for the one partner because this had nothing to do with quality or frequency. It had to do with how much time and effort they can spend on it right now or in this season of their life, because career is very important to them. They're in a job transition. And so that's absolutely critical. And taking care of their older children is critical while they can get them launched out of the house. But for this interval, that's very important. And so how we resolved this was to focus on one of their pillars. They both rank spirituality as number one. And so even though it's important to them both, they neither one of them spend a lot of time on it right now. So they're not allocating their resources to a pillar of their relationship. And it's something that they can actually do together. So what we did is we created a little ritual around it. So every morning they take a little time to meditate together or pray, whatever you want to call it. And then after they do their little ritual, they just take 5 minutes. They actually set a little clock and they just do no screen time and they just talk to each other about what their day is going to be or about what yesterday was. And it's so simple. It takes the whole thing takes less than 10 minutes. They do it at the start of their day when they have a clean slate because they both wake up at the same time. So it's pretty easy to get it in there. Before bed also works if people go to bed at a similar time or anytime throughout the day. You can even have these rituals over text message if you're truly that busy to squeeze in 10 minutes together.
In my work, I call it connection points, but same thing, right? It's these rituals, these connection points that people should have daily. Because if you're in a relationship, again, I can't say it enough. It's very easy to just take it for granted, put it on the back burner and assume it's going to be there tomorrow. But to your point and to my point as well, it takes daily commitment, daily decision making, daily choices to keep that connection alive. And honestly, for me personally, in my relationship, I feel better when I know I'm connected. My day is better when I have these rituals. And so for anyone struggling, simple thing, like you said, it's really simple to do. Just find a connection point, find something you can bond over and just spend 5 or 10 minutes daily. Pick a time that works and do it. I love that. Some couples agree on priorities, but they often disagree on how to approach them. So maybe a personality difference or just how they were raised. Does the TDS account for that? How should couples navigate the deeper differences?
So the TDS accounts for that by encouraging you to ask the question why. So once we know it's why the same priority is important to us, it could be important to us for the same reason or important to us for different reasons. And so our approaches might be different because we have different personalities and different approaches to life, or because we're actually doing this thing, the same thing for a different reason. So some people might be driven to pursue their career because they want stability for their family. So they're putting in 60-hour weeks because they're trying to secure their family's future. Someone else might be driven by their career because it's a personal growth opportunity. And certainly things like past traumas come into play. And when you're looking at these situations, the thing that I think you want to focus on most is resilience. and putting yourself in a situation where you and your partner can be the most resilient. And so by doing that, you have to really understand yourself and you have to understand each other. And when people have the same priority, but they're approaching it in different directions, that can be okay. Alignment isn't about being the same, it's about complementing each other. So everybody has gaps where they're strong and where they're weak. And alignment is about understanding these gaps, knowing where you're focusing your time and energy and resources and where your partner is. So if you understand why someone is spending all these hours at work, that it's about the same shared goal of finances, securing a financial future that's both in your top three. And so it's about setting your children up for being able to go to a good school and things of that nature. You're really working to the same thing, but it shows up in different ways. Maybe to the other partner, instead of dedicating all their time to their career, they're putting in quality time, or they're expecting quality time from you and you can't give it to them right now. And so you both prioritize relationships, but she approaches it with quality time and he approaches it with career. And so you have to reconcile these two and address them, but you can only do that by knowing why. It's about equilibrium versus balance. See, I think a lot of people go for balance, and balance is a temporary state. It's not sustainable. But equilibrium is about things being in an ecosystem that can self-sustain, that can grow together. And that's really what you want in a relationship. You want to be able to adjust for each other's changing priorities. And you can only do that by making them visible.
It reminds me of the word symbiosis. You know, you're feeding off of each other, right? This is something I'm personally curious about. So alignment is critical, but what about attunement? Being emotionally in sync with your partner in the moment. Can a couple be aligned in priorities but still feel emotionally disconnected?
Yes, that's a great question. And it does happen. You can be very aligned, but emotionally disconnected. In fact, sometimes when couples are extremely aligned, they go on autopilot and they have big blind spots together as a couple because they're not necessarily complementing each other the way someone with a sort of mid TDS score would or could. When their TDS score is too low, the danger is being on autopilot. And it depends what stage they are in the relationship. But this is something that this emotional disconnect can occur, but these check ins are what really changes that. And if you ask your partner their priorities and why it's important to them, you're going to connect more emotionally. You're going to understand them better. And it's going to happen. If you just take 5 minutes a day and ask your partner what's important for that day or what decisions they're going to make. My wife and I are both very busy, but we both value health. And so we go for a 20-minute walk every day at some point, usually in the morning before things get hectic. And so we discuss, what are your top priorities for the day? Just tell me your top two or three. What decisions do you have to make today? And by doing that, we can weigh in on each other's lives without participating actively in the day to day. But now we know what's going on. And most importantly, we give each other context for the day. So now every action that she takes, I understand why without having to ask. If she comes home late, I understand it's because she had a big decision at work to make after work, or she's prioritizing career right now for whatever reason. And so I understand having a shared context and is so critical. And so many people are context blind. They just make one decision to be together and they don't catch up. And talking while not in an emotional state is critical. So many people only have conversations when something goes off the rails, like when they're having an argument, then they're like, now we have to talk or whatever. You want to do it proactively,
Hmm.
preemptively. Talk when emotions are stable, when things are good. That's why I love the mornings, because it's like a clean slate from the day before. And now it's easier to talk about what happened yesterday or what's going to happen today and create a shared vision together for what the day looks like or what the future looks like.
It's such a great tip, Nick. I'm a fair play facilitator, and Eve Rodsky wrote the book Fair Play. And one of her things that she says in that book is that you should not talk about anything serious when emotions are high and cognition is low. And that's exactly what you're talking about too. It makes so much sense when people say they have conflict in their relationships. It's okay, when are you talking? That's a great question to find out. Oh, you're only talking when you're fighting? Of course you're having issues. Like, let's talk ahead of time. Let's be proactive. I love that. A lot of guys hear relationship work and they think it means these long, hard conversations. What are some small, and then you just gave one small everyday way that dads can stay aligned with their partners. So I love the tip about going for a walk in the morning if you can make that time. What's another one?
So I like to think of it as small, medium, and large check-ins. So a small is like a daily little ritual, 5 to 20 minutes. A medium one would be more like once a week. And so cutting out time for the relationship, whether that's a meal together or a drink together or smoke together or whatever you fancy, just taking at least an hour to 2 hours once a week where you can just connect, no screens, no distraction, no other people. It doesn't count if you involve other people. So if you're going out in a group or with friends or
Even your
families
kids.
over
Yeah, even
or
your
your
kids.
kids, that doesn't count. That can be quality time and that can be great for relationships and family, but it's not great for your core relationship. That's not great for your most important relationship, your romantic one, your particular partner, or even your closest friends. You need that one-on-one time where you can be vulnerable with each other, where it's a safe space to share. And it doesn't have to be about wishy-washy feelings. Vulnerability and intimacy are just about sharing things you don't usually share with the rest of the world. So it's about opening up to your partner in ways that you're not comfortable doing with everybody else. And you need to track your relationship like you track your fitness or like you track your finances. Measure progress. Don't just guess and don't just hope for it. Have a strategy.
Why is individual self-awareness such a critical piece of this? How does knowing yourself help in a relationship?
If you don't know yourself, you can't know anyone else. It's just pure guesswork. I used to teach poker for the World Poker Tour
Oh,
for a
cool.
lot of years. And one of the things that's relevant to so much of life is that when you're playing poker, it's all about knowing what you have, knowing what you think your opponent has, and then acting with regard for it. A lot of poker players think they know what their opponent has in many situations, but they have absolutely no idea because they don't even know what they would have in that situation. And it's like you have to know what you would do in a particular spot before you can even begin to anticipate the actions of others. You have to know yourself. So you have to know your own priorities before you can begin to account for your partner's priorities. And what I find is that no matter how different people's priorities are to start, once they share them with each other and make them visible, they naturally begin to align. The priorities that are important to partner A and to partner B, they start to overlap. And so if something is a low priority for me, but it's a high priority for you, eventually that priority will bubble up because I want to take it into account because it's important to you and we care about each other. We want each other to grow. We want each other to thrive. And so if it's important to you, it becomes increasingly important to me just by making it visible.
Mm. Making the invisible visible is such a powerful thing. It's something that Fair Play does really well for household management, division of labor, equitable division of labor. I love that your book and your work is doing that for men and women. When we talk about emotional labor, who is responsible for paying attention to this drift? Because it often falls to women in heteronormative relationships. And what is one way that men can actually step up and start holding their fair share of the emotional labor in their relationship?
Wow, that's pretty powerful. Okay, you're right. I completely agree with you. That's so true that so often it falls on the women in the relationship to maintain the communication or to be the one who has to address things, and the men will just let it go. Um, Sometimes it depends on who the pursuer is and who the withdrawer is. So in a relationship, even when there's two pursuers, one of them is going to be more active than the other in pursuing the other, and one of them is going to be more prone to withdraw from a particular situation. So if the pursuer is also the one who's being proactive, then that's one situation. It's rarely the withdrawer who's being proactive. So sometimes the pursuer in the start of the relationship is the man, but then it shifts at some point throughout the relationship and the man begins to withdraw. And it's the woman who's now in charge of things in a way that was never discussed and wasn't true in the beginning of the relationship. So I think some of that is priority drift and responsibility taking. So in the beginning of the relationship, the man might be much more proactive about pursuing, about communicating and things like that because they're very interested. And then once they get their goal and they're together, maybe all of a sudden that starts to drift and communication becomes a lower priority. So I would encourage couples to assign little roles. So, for example, with priorities, it can be the man's role to do priority check-ins. It's an objective thing. All they have to do is ask their wife or girlfriend or partner in whatever way, what are your rank these 10 priorities? All they have to do is give them a sheet. You can just run off copies and just have a stack. So just rank these, then they can take it back, do the little assessment, and identify if there's any conversation points. Another thing I would encourage couples to track is decisions. Like, what decisions do you have to make? One partner can be in charge of checking in on any ongoing decisions. So I think doing the TDS, taking the Prioritize Us test, is a great thing to take responsibility for as a man, as a father, as a looking for tools. I would encourage men to look for tools that they can use, like the TDS, that are objective, that are straightforward, that are step by step. Even if it's an emotional tool, an apology or communication tool like a heart to heart talk or something like that, just because there's steps, it's more finite. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think men in particular can really wrap their minds around that. It doesn't seem endless like an emotional conversation where if we get into it, when is it going to be over? Are there going to be tears? How do we resolve this? Am I going to make it worse, not better? All those fears that are present when you don't have a dedicated framework to work from.
One of my mentors says, fear is just faith in the wrong direction. And I think if you're allowing your fears to drive your decisions or drive your actions or inactions in this regard that we're talking about, you're setting yourself up for failure. So I love that you said assigning roles because I think with relationships, right, romance is both partners' responsibility. It has to be, or else you're probably doomed to fizzle out, right? Because if one person is responsible for holding 99% of the emotional labor for the relationship, it's going to weigh down. If you think about it visually, a weight, it's going to weigh and burden them to the point where it's, oh, he or she just doesn't care anymore. And that's how, and if you hold that, it's hard to deal with. And I think a lot of couples, especially longer term relationships, like you said, in the beginning, you have the honeymoon period or you have the pursuit and you're just trying to impress the other person and make them like you and all of the things. And then you eventually have different priorities, which is okay, but you still have to, again, where focus goes, energy flows. You still have to have some focus on the relationship, at least as a regular check-in, so that you can maintain that connection. How does a dad balancing leadership at home and work make space for his partner without dropping the ball elsewhere?
So when they're trying to allocate their resources, their time in particular, between their career and their relationship, their primary relationship, how do we go about doing that? First, I would ask them to identify how much of their time they're actually using on their career and on their relationship. Quantify it. Don't just make it be wishy washy and say you're spending too much time here or too little time here. Break down your week on a weekly basis. How many hours do I spend on each priority? And this priority list that I give in the book is a great starting point. You can customize it. If you need to figure out something in your relationship or something for yourself, change one or two of the priorities or three of them, or make a completely custom list of 10 and do an assessment that way. You can really check in with yourself in interesting ways just by ranking your priorities. So with regard to spending time in your primary relationship and your work, rarely do people, when they're at their career work, even if they're working really long days, is there no downtime. At some point they eat, at some point they take a break, at some point they do something. And at these points, they're inflection points for carving out a small amount of time to do a hello, a check-in, how are you. You got to find out what quality time is to your partner. What kind of things do they value? Do they value compliments? Do they value relaxing together? Do they like shared activities? What in particular is important? So, first, you need to know what quality time is to your partner before you can even begin to account for it. Because a lot of people, they don't need much. All they're looking is for bids for connection. And so you can infuse those throughout the day by by having a trigger. So every time I take a break, I'm going to shoot a text, or at lunchtime, I'm going to make a call, and I'm going to frame this call beforehand at home saying, I love to check in with you throughout the day. I love to talk to you, but at lunchtime, I can literally not talk for more than 2 minutes. So I want to talk to you. I want to check in. I'd love to call you when I get a chance, but it can only be this. Instead of calling and then feeling like you're rushing off the phone, or feeling like the other person isn't getting enough, and then it backfires and you set yourself up for failure because you don't actually have the space available to have a real conversation. Sometimes it's not about going deep and real conversations. It's about maintaining the connection and helping the connection build. And I think the only way you can help the connection build is by building in habits and things into your daily life that become sort of success points, so that you can create an upward spiral of success. If you don't build things in, rituals, routines, habits, check-ins, whatever you want to call these kinds of things, then you're never going to get unconsciously competent at doing them. You're not going to get them on autopilot. And you want your relationship to partially be on autopilot, but not in a static way, in a dynamic way. And that's why checking in is so powerful, because as long as you're asking the right questions or doing the right little test or whatever, it's gonna fuel your relationship forward one way or another.
I love the term you use, unconsciously competent. That is brilliant. Tonight, if you were advising a husband, a partner, a male partner, a dad, listening to this, what is one question that they should ask their partner tonight to check their alignment?
Okay, terrific. I would go home tonight and I would ask my partner, what is most important to you tomorrow? So, what are your top three priorities? But you don't have to get that in specific, just what's most important to tomorrow and why. Like, really just adopt a learning stance, be curious, and just get to know what their day looks like tomorrow. And then all of a sudden, by knowing that, tomorrow is going to be a little easier. And throughout the day or at the end of the day, there's going to be a little more to talk about. It's going to be a little more interesting. And you're going to feel a little more connected just by caring about that little piece. So I love to know the top three priorities, but just knowing one question: what's most important to you tomorrow? What do you really need to focus on? And don't assume that you know the why when they give the answer. Part of what you're doing is asking why, so that they can explain in their own terms why the most important thing to them is important, rather than just thinking that you know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Because a lot of times you don't even know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Never mind what your partner is doing and why.
That is so true. I have a lot of questions. I think I actually need to skip some because I think we're going to run out of time and I want to make sure I hit the best ones. So I'm going to move on to something for couples feeling really disconnected, maybe even considering separating. How can this framework help?
This framework can help couples assess whether or not they should stay together by knowing if they're far apart on things that are non-negotiables to them, that are deal breakers. If I rank career number one, is that going to change? When is that going to change? Why is it number one? If I say that growth is absolutely critical to me. What does my growth look like? Does that mean taking a lot of classes? Does that mean going back to school? Does that mean traveling for seminars and things like that? Or does that mean reading books every day or taking a class together? What does it look like? So, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
That's okay. So if a couple is using this framework and they're feeling like
Oh,
they're in really dire straits, they're thinking about maybe we should get a divorce, maybe we should separate. I know in the book you mention even if you're far apart, even if you have a high TDS score, it doesn't mean you're doomed. That's not what that means. But explain how this framework can help that couple that is considering separating.
sure. So, when you're considering separating, you need to know why you're separating. And so, is it because there are non negotiables, or is it because things just aren't working out right now? Is there love? A lot of times there's love present, but there's misaligned priorities. And one of the things I like to check in with the couples about is their attraction level to each other. I like to ask, how much time do you spend flirting? Do you flirt? How much time did you flirt in the beginning of your relationship? How much time are you flirting now? Do you flirt throughout the day? I think flirting is a very good indicator of where the relationship's at and where it used to be to where it is now. And if you're going to reconnect and move forward, that needs to play an important role, because that every time you flirt, it says, I'm attracted to you. I'm attracted to you. I'm attracted to you. And if you're not doing that a lot, then your partner is not going to know that you're still attracted to them. They're going to think that you were. They might never doubt that you were, but they might doubt that you are. And if you still are, you need to show them.
Yeah, that is so true. What do you say to a couple that tries your framework, tries the TDS, but they don't see immediate results? What should they expect after taking this test?
Okay. So after taking the test, it's most about sparking the right conversations. So what you're looking to do is you're looking to churn up unspoken areas, making the invisible visible. You're looking to have conversations that are hard, that might not have normally occurred, especially when it's around sex or spirituality or something that you hold very dear and personal. And maybe you don't talk about with everyone. You really need to talk about those things with your partner, have conversations that might be uncomfortable. And I think with any growth, I would encourage people to lean into the discomfort, because that's where all the growth happens. If you're too comfortable, you're not going to grow. And if you're not growing, then you're going to atrophy eventually. You're going to lose your edge. You're not going to be headed in the right direction. So you have to be moving forward. If you're not seeing results immediately, then you're probably focused on the wrong areas. You're not having the right conversations. So if it seems off from the beginning, focus on a strength and talk about the why for your highest aligned priority. Otherwise, look at where you're most misaligned and really try to understand why that's the case for your partner, and reassess after you discuss it and you're having difficulty. Say, okay, let's do this again.
Hmm.
Not the same day, but a couple of days later, even, and then do it again with regard for everything you heard. Like maybe people were defining words wrong, or maybe we were having a miscommunication over the vocabulary of the situation. A lot of times when couples are really misaligned, there's multiple miscommunications going on at different levels. And alignment is absolutely not about being perfect. It's about being intentional. And so if you love your partner and they love you, that intentionality will come through, and you will turn conflict into communication, and you will improve over time. The more likely you are to separate, the more important it is to put in time now. In other words, you don't have time to wait. You don't have the luxury of seeing how things play out. You need to identify the tools that could help you, like the TDS or like the tools that you offer, and put those into play, put those into practice, at least one a day. They say when you're growing a business, you need to spend at least 4 hours a day on marketing in the beginning and just be doing that relentlessly. And so the same thing is true for your relationship. If your relationship is a high priority for you, How much time are you putting into a day? Not just quality time together. How much time are you spending preparing for the conversations? How much time are you spending lining up dates? How much time are you spending creating excitement? How much time are you spending even thinking about the relationship and setting it up for success? Because so many people set themselves up for failure through indecision kills. You're much better off making a bad decision than not deciding anything because you'll miss all your opportunities.
Mm.
And people aren't proactive enough in thinking about their relationship and how to improve it, I think.
I think so too. I think we take it for granted that it's going to be there tomorrow. And the truth is, it may be, but also may not be. And so the more proactive you can be, the better. I agree with that. I have a question about the framework. Can the TDS work for dads or moms to help in their relationships with their kids?
Oh, awesome question. So the TDS can absolutely work for any relationship, especially with your kids, but works for business relationships, potential partnerships too. For to work with kids, you just need to tweak the test a little bit. So instead of sex, for example, you might put in sports or play or something like that. You want to identify, you want to try to, depending on how the age of your kids, the older they are, the more the test will just work and you just have to replace one or two things. The younger they are, the more you're going to have to try to think about things at their level. So, what are priorities for kids? Okay, maybe they go to school, maybe they like sports, maybe they like to play games, maybe they like TV. So, what are their priorities? Maybe they like spending time with daddy, maybe they like spending time with mommy. Depending on the age, we're going to allocate these priorities. You're still going to keep it 10. Keeping it 10 is the key. And have your kids rank it and you rank it. Don't rank what you think they're going to rank. Rank what's important to you and then compare. And it's going to give you a really good idea of how aligned you are with your child's mindset. And with business partnerships, I would encourage the same thing. What's important to a partnership for the future? What do we both value? Where do we rank things? So if you're looking at a business, I like to take the top 10 projects or tasks we're thinking about focusing on. I rank them. My business partner ranks them. We compare, we see how aligned we are on the future. If not, we talk about why I ranked something high and he didn't, or vice versa. And so it's a really powerful tool because it instantly gets us to the heart of the matter of what tasks or projects the business should be focused on that we both agree on. And two minds are better than one, obviously. So the areas of agreement are the areas of focus when you're applying it to project management or something like that. And discussing what your kids' priorities are with the spouse will strengthen the relationship too. So even if you just ask your kid, well, what's the three most important things to them? And then you ask why and act with regard for that. That doesn't always have to be a comparison, like taking a formal test, and then share that with your partner. These are all bonding moments. And decisions shape destiny. So you need to align them with your priorities because you're making all these micro decisions every single day. You can make them at a higher level, and it's actually very relieving rather than figuring out how to spend your time every single day. You say, I'm going to allocate this much time to these priorities. And it frees you up to not have to focus on the things that matter less.
Being a proactive partner, a proactive father, this is what Prioritize Us is teaching anyone who reads this. So again, the book is called Prioritize Us. Author is Nick Brancato. You can find it on Amazon. I'm sure that it's in lots of bookstores across the world where you buy your books. Nick, how can people connect with you and learn more about Prioritize Us other than going out and purchasing the book?
So I would love to hear from anybody on Instagram. My Instagram is personal dev coach, like personal development coach, personal dev coach on Instagram. They can DM me any questions or comments. I'd love to hear from them. Also, my website is nickbrancato.com. That's nickbrancato.com. If they go there, they can learn more about this. I have a blog there, so I write some articles, and I actually have a few spots available for private coaching to help any individuals or couples who want to uncover their core priorities and confront misalignment and build stronger relationships. And for a limited time now, anyone who's listening, if they go to nickbrancato.com, they can actually get the ebook of Prioritize Us absolutely free.
That's amazing. I highly recommend doing that as soon as possible for anyone listening. Nick, this has been awesome. Great conversation, really wise insights. What are any final words for the dads out there that are trying to be better partners and better fathers?
I would say that relationships don't need to be identical to work, but they do require understanding, intentional conversations, and small, meaningful adjustments. My journey with my wife through a lot of tragedy and trauma taught me that when priorities are clear, relationships thrive, even in the most difficult circumstances.
So true. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you.